I'm Glen Dickson, contributing editor for TVNewsCheck. And like many in the room, I remember television conferences where broadcasters were talking about delivering video to computers and mobile phones as a brand new thing. Obviously, those days are long gone, even though they actually weren't really too long ago. And today, every broadcast news operation is serving two masters, as Arnaud described. You have your traditional on-air newscast and a digital audience on the web and mobile apps. On our panel today, integrating digital and TV production evolving to Newsroom of the future, engineering, news, and digital execs are going to talk about that challenge. So joining me today from my left, going across, are Joe Addalia. He's Director of Technology Projects for Hearst Television. Frederic Roux, VP of Sales Americas for Dalet. Dave Siegler, VP of Technical Operations for Cox Media Group. And Emily Stone, who's Director of Multiplatform Content for WTTG. So let's dive right in. Joe, can you describe the workflow today for creating a story for your traditional on-air newscast versus the one for creating a digital story for your website, your mobile app? Explain where those workflows overlap and where they're still separate and why.
Okay. So let me see if I can capture this in a reasonable amount of time. Good afternoon, everybody. So our story creation is similar in many senses from the digital to the linear play out. So I would say that, you know, in the sense of actually creating and identifying the story, that's pretty traditional and is the same. Where we really start to change in the workflow is when we're actually writing and/or editing the video for that particular story, where there's kind of a fork in the road for the two. So we really, I think, you know, just to be quite honest, I think our teams do an excellent job on this, but I do think there's room for improvement. And why I say that is because I think we are doing a lot today with manpower. So for example, we have what I call Center of Excellence is really around our company who handle the digital publishing of our content. So our newsrooms across all of our stations, we own 31 stations in 27 cities. So across all of the country, the newsrooms are focused primarily on the linear part of the production and the linear workflow. And then our digital specialists will pick it up from there and make sure that we get the content published properly in the right format. And in many cases, that includes video editing, where we will actually you know, do a re-edit or a digital first edit, you know, very separate and very different from what we would publish to the main newscast. So I'll leave it there, and I'll let the others.
Yeah, we can drill down in more detail on that. Frederic, briefly, what do you see from your customers in terms of how this workflow breaks out between traditional and digital?
Well, honestly, I think we have all of the workflows under the sun in terms of how to efficiently manage those type of production, right? So we have basically customers who embrace the assignment process as part of their whole newsroom operation, so that when I'm assigning a story, it's assigned both for my 5 p.m. show and for digital. But then we have many other customers who basically still embrace the digital as an afterthought, in the sense that the main product that goes to digital is not original content. It's basically, you know, the recording of my newscast, then I'm kind of like cutting, slicing, and just pushing there. So we have this whole spectrum, and I think it goes back to what Anne was saying, is that it really depends whether the newsroom has embraced digital as its own platform in which we required original content. So when I see basically customers who repurpose the newscast, their workflow is traditionally not very integrated, right? Just recording their product, cut it, push it, and this can happen in any type of solution. When there's a focus on producing original content, then you see those very integrated workflows, you see those type of collaboration that, from our standpoint, benefits the whole organization.
Okay. Dave, what's your experience at Cox on this issue?
Well, as in so many cases, the systems are the easy part, but the people are the hard part. And you know, it's a matter of aligning thoughts. It's aligning process. We've got the traditional process down. I mean, all of us here do. We know what we're doing on the broadcast side, but the digital part of it is it's a bit different, and we're really trying to turn that ship around in our place of digital first and social first. And you know, no longer does the consumer want to or need to be home at 6 o'clock to watch the news. And oh, by the way, the news happens at 2:30 or any time. So it's really more of a mindset of, it's just always an iterative, ongoing thing. The stories, and yes, we're good at putting on a traditional newscast, but what happens in all the between times? And so we see social and digital as being the opportunity there.
Okay, thank you. Emily, how do you manage this workflow at WTTG?
These guys have touched on it a little bit of everything, I would say, but I think you really have to, from when you're trying to take a story that's meant for TV and place it on digital, you have to definitely think about what the digital audience, why in the world would they care? Why would they share the story? How can you present the story to a digital audience that's going to make them interested in it and going to make them want to read it and want to tell other people about it? Because in the end, social is driving a lot of our traffic, so we definitely have to think about, from that perspective, okay, what's going to make people interested in this story? There is a lot to, oftentimes we're publishing the same video from television, maybe cut a little bit differently. A lot of times we're trying to create unique content, unique video content. I know we're going to get into how that's a challenge technically, but it's speed and it's just being able to make it fit the platform.
Okay. I wanted to follow up with you. We had this notion of a multi-platform editor, and is that something that's in place at your station or broadly across your organization, and how is that different than traditional setup?
Well, I think what you had asked about was the Multiplatform Managing Editor.
Right.
And we do have a station in our station group, so we have 16 O&Os. Our Minneapolis station has a multi-platform managing editor who works on both sides. He actually came from digital. It's extremely beneficial. He is very versed in digital content and what makes a story, successful online. And he's really great at knowing how to make that also make sense on the other side, on TV side. So it's working extremely well for them. We have a couple of stations, including mine, where we have someone like me who's in charge of strategy and overall vision, and kind of where we're prioritizing what content in general, and not necessarily so hands-on during the day, writing content or producing content. And I think that's really important. That's a good first step, because you can't have someone who's in the middle of all of that, who's really trying to think about the bigger picture as well. And we've seen that work pretty well in a couple of our stations.
And is that person in Minneapolis, is that somebody who came out of traditional broadcast?
No, he came from digital. He was one of our digital managers.
Okay.
Yep.
Joe, is that a structure you guys have explored at Hearst at all?
Well, Hearst has had a digital media manager, if you will, at every one of our stations since digital really hit many years ago. And that position has refined itself throughout the years, so I would say yes, we do follow in that. But again, just to sample on the notion of having the center of excellence, for example, we have people at one of our stations that focus on national content, and that's what they do, and they make sure the national is published across all of our platforms properly. We have another team that focuses on social, and it's kind of like a social SWAT team, if you will, that makes sure that if there's a big breaking story on a particular station, they'll assist the station, but then they'll also bring that story out on the social platforms nationwide or worldwide. So we kind of approach it to where we have these these assist teams or center of excellence, as I use the term anyway, that brings us up to another level. The technical systems in place are not mature enough to allow this to happen with either something based on metadata or artificial intelligence. It's not there yet, so we're backfilling essentially with these teams who are doing a superb job. We're really doing what we need to do, but we do recognize that there's better ways to do this.
Dave, how are you? Have you explored that idea at Cox? And I know you talked before and on our call about there's technology issues and there's cultural issues, and maybe you can talk about whether you see a multi-platform person in the future, running both sides.
Sure. Well, we, like I said earlier, it's changing the hearts and minds of the people in the process, and we've had digital content people on one side, we have traditional on one side, and one of the things that we have is we've got radio as well in a number of our markets, and we've got talk radio. And so it's understanding that content as well. So we're doing digital for radio and TV and the traditional platforms, but it's just ever evolving. And I don't know that anybody's really fully figured this thing out. And you know, everybody's doing their best. They realign their people. We've combined, in a number of our markets, we've combined our newsrooms with radio and TV into one newsroom. A couple of markets, we've got radio, TV, and newspapers in the newsroom. So, you know, we contend that regardless of platform, the news is the news. And, you know, the hard part is, you know, how do you produce for it? How do you cut that content? Where the traditional side is, okay, it's going to be a minute 30 package, okay? Right. On the digital, you know, they're talking 10, 15 seconds. So, of the same story.
Frederic, you have a customer or two who's explored a different model, multi-platform editor. Maybe you could expand on that.
Yeah, so actually, when we engaged with the NBC local station around 10 years ago, that was at the core of their restructuration, right? So they wanted to basically build a newsroom that was platform agnostic to some extent, and that came from basically deciding to work outside of the rundown, created basically that's what they call the content pool, where you will aggregate all of the interesting raw material of the day, all the stories of the day, independently where you're going to consume and publish. And that's required, obviously, a full operational restructuration, right? You have to redefine people's roles. So to the point I was made, it's not, at heart, it's more like a cultural and operational shift that need to occur, because in many organizations, digital has been an afterthought, right? So you concentrate your core product on the newscast, and then there was a small team that slowly became this add-on, this Frankenstein on top of the newsroom that now needs to be reintegrated. So they realized that to be efficient, they had to break down those walls, break down those silos, and bring everything together. But to be able to do that, they specifically talked to us because they need a different type of system, right? Something that was more media asset management centric, something that did not care about, you know, rundown, timing, and things that could have those functions. But at the heart, first, aggregate and then have a platform manager for digital, platform manager for social. So I'm not going to tell you it was an easy transition, right? Because I mean, on a human level, it's quite an important shift, but that's how they enabled from one central newsroom now to publish across all of those platforms.
Thank you. You know, when we talk about silos between the broadcast and digital side, obviously broadcast sides had newsroom computer systems based on rundowns driving that production process for decades. Digital side, you have content management systems, which broadcasters have had varying levels of fun with, I guess. Want to talk to everybody about what your approach has been with CMSs. You know, did you start with an outside vendor? Did you do your own development? And I guess going forward, how do you see the CMS tying into the newsroom computer system better, or maybe even having one umbrella system? But Joe, maybe you could lead off.
Sure. So, you know, Hearst Corporation is, you know, has many verticals, including, you know, magazines, newspapers, and of course, local television. We have some other divisions as well. We had at one time, it was over 10 CMSs throughout the company. A couple of years ago, we made the strategic decision to actually combine and seriously build a CMS for Hearst Corporation. So Hearst Television uses the Hearst platform. We call it Media OS, and there are some very specific handles and tools within the system that help the television stations. But there are also other publishing tools that help out magazines and newspapers as well. The one thing through the process one of the things through the process that we really identified was that you know, publishing to the digital platforms is very different than creating editorial content, right? And I think that's the takeaway here. Is everybody thinks that, you know, or a lot of people suggest that, you know, in your newsroom computer system you should have all of these tools to publish, you know, as a CMS would, and they're really two different animals, right? You're creating content, you're writing content, you're tracking content in the editorial system, but yet in the CMS you're publishing content, and yes, tracking it, dealing with analytics, etc. So they are separate systems. Where they do come together, though, is when you're using the like content. So if you're using video that you're pulling from the traditional side, how do you bring that into the CMS? Very difficult to do. And what we're learning today is that it really turns into an asset management question. So it's actually a third animal that enters into the equation. So yes, you have your content management, yes, you have your editorial side, but now it's the actual assets. And, you know, if you will, instances of those assets, different versioning of each assets. And that's what's becoming very difficult to track. So you might have a digital version of the parent story, and how do you keep an eye on that? And where do you know, where does it go? What platforms does it wind up on, including traditional? And those are the kind of things that we're thinking about and working on right at this time. So it's very different than just saying, oh, you have a CMS, let's just pile on more features. It's really, you got to look at the end-to-end workflow here, and in this meshing of the digital workflows, if you will, and the traditional workflows. It's really, there's a convergence point, but the CMS itself is a purpose-built design tool to publish. So.
How long did that project take Hearst to develop your own? Once you
start to end, which is wouldn't even call it end, is 2 years. Yeah, it was a lengthy process, but we're still. What's nice about us owning it is we can iterate on it. We can do whatever we want,
right.
And that's turned out to be very good.
Emily, can you talk about your experience with CMSs?
Yeah. So we do and always have used an outside vendor for CMS, and we've been through a couple of different iterations of that. I think as we're distributing different platforms now, and we're always adding and changing specs and things like that, and requirements for different platforms. To me, the CMS has just evolved over time. It used to be a web story content creator, where you build your web story, and now it's got to be that, but it also has to be able to push to instant articles. It's got to be able to push to Google AMP and to a variety of different syndicators. So you really have to have a tool that is flexible and able to change with the industry and change with your needs, because you can be really limited if you don't have that.
Dave, have you been on have your stations been on the same CMS for a while, or have you had the same kind of experience with turnover and going through different versions, et cetera?
Very much the same experience. We started out about 7 years ago to create our own from scratch, and we stuck with that and had a lot of pain points, learned a lot, and the most important lesson we learned is we're not good at writing software. And so about 3 years ago, it's like, okay, enough of this. We're going to go buy one off the shelf, a white label, and customize it to our needs. We bought actually 2 of them, so we are now getting ready to ditch those 2 to come into one common one. So, we're thinking or hoping that this has matured somewhat over the years. But I think I fully agree, certainly fully agree with Joe, that the asset management is such a critical part of it. That you might have content living in 2 different worlds. It's best if you don't, but if you do, they at least need to be talking and compatible.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to follow up with Frederic on that in a second, but I do want to question, the amount of turnover you're talking about, you would never be flipping Newsroom computer systems over at that kind of rate. So
right.
Is the reason why the systems aren't meeting all your needs, is it a function that the requirements are just so dynamic, or is it the vendors that you're working with aren't, they don't completely understand the broadcast market or what you need out of it? I don't know if it's a problem. Is it a problem that no one can solve easily, or are people just missing some fundamental things you need as a customer?
I think it's both us and also the vendors as well. It's just changing so fast, and there are new platforms and there are new, social outlets. New ones are cooked up every day, and how do you keep up with that? And how do you keep your system progressive and where it'll suit your needs and not be aged, and it's old in 6 months and it won't do something new that popped up a month ago. So just having it dynamic, and I think it's so critical to have a really good partner in your vendor to stay engaged.
Frederic, Joe mentioned before, the difficulty with the CMS basically became an asset management question from his perspective. So what's your take on that as an asset management provider, and what kind of integration do you have right now with leading CMS vendors out in the field?
So yes, I think the point of the separation between the production aspect and publishing aspect is essential, right? Because I think what we've seen a lot in the past few years is that I think through the lack of correct tools in the traditional newsroom system, people have to start to produce in the CMS, right? So uploading raw material, do simple cuts, writing your scripts, but at the end you break that link between your newsroom, your editorial team, and the team that works in digital. So what we've done is basically, because we are at heart a media asset management system, we're able to create those notions of assets. So when it can be either the content that's within your on-prem or local system, it can be the asset that exists in your CMS, but then giving you a global view of all of those relationships between the asset, because at the heart of it, there's a complex metadata, there's maintaining relationship between all of that content, and it's impossible, if you have a newsroom system, a video production system, you need to take one step back, and the second part of it is what just mentioned, is the complexity of integration. Every day there's a new Instagram, there's going to be a new Snapchat, there's going to be, you don't even know. And so it's impossible to address the challenge head on unless you have a production system that first at the heart fully agile, right? So you can basically have enough open APIs, tools to integrate with any third party, and then adjust your workflows. I mean, we haven't touched upon the difficulty yet of how do you package all of that content? How do I burn my graphics, put some titling, put those big text that the Millennium loves on those 10 seconds video? That's, again, complex packaging that your CMS might not or might not address. So what we do is that we bring all of those functions within the MAM on top of the news production, but then keep the CMS as the end-user facing interface, right? So the web page or the final plugin into your social feed. But really building all those production tools and that complex packaging needs to happen in your on-prem production system with maintaining deep ties with your CMS. I'm saying that like this, it sounds super easy. It's obviously not easy, but it's really start by looking at what you have on-prem in terms of technology to be able to enable those type of deep ties.
Thanks. You actually queued up my next question, which is packaging was what everyone was talking about when broadcasters first started putting stuff on digital. It was, we have to transcode it, we got to resize the graphics, and that stuff sounded, 10 years after, you would imagine a lot of that. If you were not in the insider industry, you imagine a lot of that stuff to just be automated and become simple and go away, become an abstraction layer, or whatever software guys say. What are the broadcasters here? What's your experience with packaging? Is that still as big a challenge as it was when you guys first started putting video on the web? And what else is a particular pain point besides just a nitty-gritty technical thing that's hard to do? Joe?
Okay, I'll go first. So nitty-gritty technical thing hard to do, I'm good at those, so we'll go there first. So what we've learned is that in the video world, for digital, it requires a new cut, and I think that's okay. We all know that. How do you do that in a news environment when 75% of your news editing or greater is in the field now? So all the raw video that you would typically use to do this is in the field. Now your news photographer or editor, whoever's in the field, is tied up, doing his assignments for the day, and typically doesn't have the extra, time and availability to do the digital recut. So what we find is that one of the pain points is how do you make this raw video available to a team, whether it's back at the station or somewhere centrally located, it doesn't matter. You still have to pull this raw video, associate it to the story with the right metadata or GUID, and get it back to a container that people can work from, either in proxy or in high-res. This is a challenge right now. There are a few systems that do it. We have a strong partnership with Adobe. That's one of the ones we look at. Bit Central is another. We're working with bits and pieces today, and it's an evolution, and we have to get there. So this has been, and I think for the short term is a pain point. We will solve this, but it is one of the key items here, and actually in the digital workflow itself is that's where the content is, and that's where this is going to be really created. So I think I could leave it there.
Okay, thank you. Dave, from your point of view, what is an outstanding technical issue in repurposing content for digital?
Well, I think a lot of it is on the front end, on the acquisition side. So search and discovery of content. whether it be in our existing legacy Avid system or if it's in, I mean, we've got all kind of formats being thrown at us. People are sending video from cell phones and, just all kind of formats and resolutions and shot from devices. And, just shoehorning that content in on the front end to serve all platforms. I mean, if there's a consumer out there that happens to get the video of the plane crash going down in the cornfield, and he's got that content first and it's on a phone, we want that content first. We want to be first with it, but you still got to get it to fit on TV, And so doing the side panels and all this. So I think a lot of the pain points on the front end.
Emily, one of the things we talked about preparing for this was how journalists are increasingly using social media tools as a news gathering tool, and maybe you can talk about some of the things that you've done at Fox along those lines, and I think you had an interesting example in the distribution side too.
Yeah, there are, as I'm sure everyone in this room knows, a variety of tools that can help you with content gathering for social. Of course, we all know, especially in breaking news, it's all about speed. So tools like a Banjo, anything that searches for fresh content that's related to a specific location in real time, those are incredibly valuable tools. One thing that comes up with that, that kind of piggybacking on the pain point, that tends to be an issue for our group is it's great that we found that content, but how do we make sure that we have the rights to use it and all collaborate together on that? And I've heard on a couple of other panels at different events, people talking about content acquisition and rights management and stuff like that, and some interesting takes on how to really make that a little bit more efficient. But yeah, I think tools like a Banjo. And honestly, CrowdTangle, it's not necessarily a user-generated content tool, but especially for locals, CrowdTangle was recently introduced quite a pretty robust system for locals specifically of resources and different lists that publishers and that newsrooms can use to look for fresh content that's gaining engagement, not necessarily any kind of threshold specifically, but just as building as far as engagement goes, so that you can track down stories before your competition does. So I would say it's with that though, it's just like anything else, breaking down the silos to where you don't have 3 people in a newsroom trying to find the content. You have 12 people that understand how to use those tools constantly all day.
You have 12 people?
No.
You had an interesting example during one of your hurricanes that you covered, using a social media tool for actually distributing video amongst the stations. I think you mentioned sending video around through Slack.
We have. Our stations have recently started using Slack. I know a lot of station groups use that to communicate in real time. One of the things that I've not seen yet is a collaborative workflow tool that's really fully functional. So if anyone's looking to create something, that's a great way to go. But yeah, Slack is great, especially when you're talking about people in different places or different cities. I mean, it's even great when you have your crews in the field versus people working back at the station. You can send video and photos of any size extremely quickly. It does eliminate a lot of email, and it makes it just more efficient to communicate in real time. The example that you're mentioning was our Tampa station during Irma, and they had a lot of success with, as the storm came in, they lost the ability to transmit in other ways. So instead, they were actually sending look lives back to the other stations via Slack. And it's just finding different ways to be able to share content with other stations or with people that work for your station in a different location.
Frederic, one of the things we talked about was a digital content producer is looking at they're gathering news in a different way, which is and how does the interface for them have to look different than your traditional newsroom computer system that's all focused on a rundown, and you have your traditional news feeds, and you have your feeds coming in from your trucks in the field. What does the ideal interface look like for a digital platform producer?
So, I mean, I'm going to bounce back on some of the comments that were made because, so a few years back, many of our customers started to want to acquire, you know, Twitter feeds, YouTube videos, Facebook as part of the raw material that needs to be in the newsroom, right? Because obviously today your news wires are not enough. And that's not true just for your traditional 5P broadcast. That's for, that's obviously, sorry, that's mainly true for your digital newsroom, but also even more true for your 5 p.m., your traditional show producer. So we started to build those aggregation tools, but very quickly, there's a few things that came out is that you cannot just make them appear as wires, as a user experience that people are accustomed to when using those social tools. You know, those are very slick, very visual access to the content. So it forced us to basically, you know, hire people just to think differently of what type of user experience we want to put in front of the customer, and that we basically design a whole social feed aggregator that is dedicated to that looks nothing like the rest of the traditional tool, but that is what those specific users want to see. But then as we unravel that thread, a few extra things came into light. The first is that, okay, great, now I have a humongous amount of content coming into my system. How do I make sense of all of that, right? So the first thing is you need some form of auto-tagging of your content. You need then to apply tools for discovery. So then we developed a tool that does content discovery. So if I'm working on a story, something comes down on Twitter, I get notified, which then raised the other question about notification, collaboration. So we have our own platform of collaboration and tools in the system, and then all our customers are like, but we're on Slack, so what do we do? So, so now we're working on the implementation on Slack. So what's, you know, this simple idea of I want to see my Twitter, my news production system, basically had us redevelop a whole chain of tools that basically both change the way I'm consuming and visualizing content, and also the way I share and access that content. And just to make a quick view into the future, this idea of aggregating all of those feeds, no matter how slick the interface is, to make sense of it, that's where we're looking at using, you know, cognitive services, you know, AI services to be able to automatically tag that content and in the long run build recommendation engine, because otherwise it's impossible, right? And anyway, I'm gonna stop there, but it's not a done deal, right? Because there's still those silos where, you know, there's a lot of good external tools that exist for that aggregation, but from our standpoint, those are tools which are made historically more for marketing, team rights, acquisition and publishing, and also you break the link between your news production cycle and, again, the publishing and aggregating of that content. So if you want to see statistics of how my content has fared, I don't have that information in my newsroom system. I need to open, you know, a separate interface.
That's great. Some great insight.
That's exactly right, though. That's a great point that we can't lose. That when you're using, you know, what I call out-of-band applications, and you're going to, no offense, but if you're going to move video via Slack, that you lose all the reference to that video from any system that it was acquired on. That's why it has to be part of the you know, the governing system or editorial system.
Well, I have a couple more questions for these guys, but I'd like to open it up for your questions, so that we have a few minutes for questions. Michael's got the mic.
Could I add something really quickly?
Yeah, Dave has a nugget.
One of the things that is way different than our traditional newsrooms that we do in our digital content is they get instantaneous feedback from TweetDeck and from social platforms. I mean, those monitors are more important to them than anything else, and that's what's trending out there on the web, and they're watching that really like a hawk. So unlike Nielsen and you get your ratings tomorrow and how'd you do last night, it's instantaneous feedback, and it's very, very helpful.
Sure, go ahead.
Jack Pagano, COO of Ariana Television. We have 20 to 40 million viewers in Afghanistan. And here's my dilemma every day. We do the kind of stories we want to do, but most of the journalists don't understand they have to do many, 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 many tasks. The traditional old broadcaster wants to do one story a day, and he does not want to do anything more. The young broadcaster cannot handle doing Facebook, Twitter, sending the feeds, giving the footage back, doing live. What do we do, and what do we do to train the future journalist who's going to have to do many, many things. I scratch my head every day. I bite my tongue every single day. I can't be a George Patton. I have to find a way to get the most out of them. What do we do?
That's a good question. We haven't touched on training, so whoever wants to take the first stab at that. Emily?
I'll go. So you have to train them. I think you have to, and it sort of equates to a legacy, old school legacy newsroom, where you had exactly that situation, where you had reporters who have never done anything except appear on TV. It takes time, and it takes you recognizing each of their strengths and weaknesses, and this one is good at live television, so they'll be great at Facebook Live, or this one is good at writing really, really long packages that are always too long, so they'll be great at writing really long stories for for digital. But it really is, and that it's true with anything. I mean, we all have different tools. We're all set up different ways. But if we don't train our people to use the tools that we're giving them, be it a banjo or whatever the case may be, if you don't know how to use that tool to its full capacity, then you might as well not have the tool. So I don't know if that really answered your question, except it told you that you have to train people. But I would take it in chunks. I mean, decide if your priority is video or if your priority is writing text stories, and just kind of work through each process with them.
Thanks. Well, I got a very analog signal that we're out of time.
Sorry.
So I thank you very much for my panelists. Been very informative. And there's the alarm, right on time.
Wow.
See? Okay, thank you.
Right on time.